less put together today than normal because Cindy accidentally bit me and I had to deal with that most of the day. But the news doesn't wait, so let's get it. It's only a matter of time before Ukraine gets fighter jets and joins NATO. What's been happening in Bakhmut? Why did the audience erupt in laughter last time that Lavrov had a speaking engagement? And is China actually going to be supplying weapons to Russia? With that, hi, my name is Yulia and you're watching The Brief, where we talk about everything that happened in and around Ukraine in the week thus far in about 20 minutes. Let's go. Western partners will start supplying fighter jets to Ukraine and it's only a matter of time, says the Prime Minister of Latvia, Krišjānis Kariņš. If we had fighter jets, we would have given them too. The supply of combat aircraft is only a matter of time. I see no reason why the West should not supply fighter jets. If the Ukrainians need fighter jets, they should get them. 2 Ukrainian pilots arrived in the US to evaluate their skills, including on F-16 fighter jets. The pilots are being trained in Tucson, Arizona, and could be joined by 10 more as soon as this month. The training program has 2 purposes. 1 is increasing their skills, and 2, gauging how long the training program might take. Meanwhile, at a US training base in Germany, Ukrainian military conducts war games. The exercises come as Ukraine is emerging from winter that was expected to offer a lull in fighting. And it did. General Mark Milley attended the training on Thursday, and this is what he had to say. The Ukrainians are moving things around on these maps to determine what is their best course of action, and they determine the advantages and disadvantages of the risks associated. It's a common thing that all militaries do. General Milley refused to detail the options that the Ukrainians tested during the exercises, but other senior American officials suggested that Ukraine might start moving towards Russia's defense lines in an offensive this spring, including in Donetsk and Luhansk regions. But all that only confirms that Ukraine is moving closer and closer to being integrated into the NATO-style militaries and to a NATO membership itself. And according to Urmas Reinsalu, that membership is the only way of guaranteeing Ukraine's safety. Well, except for nuclear weapons. If we say that we do not see Ukraine as a member of NATO after this war, it will mean that we fear or predict that Russia will attack again, and then NATO countries will be involved in a world war, or at least in a war in the northern European continent. This is a confirmation that a large-scale war will happen again. He rejected any alternatives to Ukraine's membership in the alliance, including the plan to get closer to NATO in exchange for negotiations with Russian Federation. That is, according to the media, being promoted by Great Britain, France, and Germany. And I have to agree with him. Russia is still going to attack if Ukraine is not in NATO, and we have seen that with the fact that they broke the Budapest Memorandum. Any security guarantees are not going to uphold unless they're Article 5. Hey, have you heard yet? There is a collection of amazing Ukrainian-themed, not basic, not cheesy, we are a graphic designer after all, merch on yulia.com that I created with 5 amazing illustrators. And 50% of the profits from said merch go to support the armed forces of Ukraine. And every month we vote which specific cause those profits go to. If you want to participate in such polls as well as have a say in what comes out on the channel next, and have Zoom calls with me every month, please join my Patreon. And in the meanwhile, don't forget to like this video, leave a comment, subscribe to my channel, and turn on all of your notifications. Thank you! And speaking of Ukraine will start producing high-precision Vilha-M missiles. And it's in the talks that their radius of action is going to be increased to 150 kilometers. However, it wasn't specified when the missiles might be ready or their quantity in production. But it is being said that Ukraine is hoping to produce them just in time for the counteroffensive. And speaking of offenses and defenses, Ukraine and Canada are going to develop cooperation in the field of security and defense. I'm glad to welcome to Ukraine the Chief of Defense Staff of the Canadian Armed Forces, General Wayne Eyre. We had a frank conversation. I informed my colleague about the situation at the front and we paid special attention to the eastern direction. And that was said by General Valery Zaluzhny. The commanders also discussed the issue of the supply of weapons and ammunition, and of course the development of cooperation in the field of security and defense. And while they were at it, images of Mariinka in the Donetsk region surfaced, showcasing exactly why Ukraine needs to be able to defend at a much greater capacity against Russia. And that's what you're seeing on the screen now. It used to be a city, just like a city where you live in. It used to house people. It used to house families. It used to be someone's home. And now it's a ruin, just like Mariupol, just like Severodonetsk, and just like Bakhmut. And Russia is responsible. And speaking of Bakhmut, there has been lots of speculation this week, past week, this past month in general. And I'm here to tell you that despite all the rumors, there is no mass withdrawal of troops, according to Serhiy Cherevati. The fighting is mostly going on the outskirts of Bakhmut, and the armed forces of Ukraine, the border service, and the National Guard control the city. According to the general staff, the Russians are unsuccessfully trying to surround it. The defense forces are able to deliver ammunition, food, and medicine to Bakhmut, as well as take away the wounded. He also emphasized that no military in the world publicly announces their tactics. And since we're on the topic of destroyed Ukrainian cities, which are only a part of Russian war crimes, Ukraine just signed an agreement on the creation of the International Investigation Center for the Russian aggression in The Hague. The center will be collecting the evidence base for the future tribunal of the Russian officials. And Kyiv is working with foreign partners to create a system of compensation for the damages caused by the Russian aggression. The authorities of Ukraine want to use the mechanism of reparations, paid by the sanctioned Russian officials and state structures after the war. From the first days of the war, we began to document all the crimes, destruction, and damage. There is a reliable, transparent, and high-quality tool for estimating how much Ukraine needs to recover. We already understand that this amount will exceed $700 billion. And that's just to date. There is speculation that Ukraine might be able to win the war by the end of 2023, but that's about a year from now. Can you imagine how much more damage Russia can cause in that time frame? 700 billion in 12 months. And 12 more months to go. And speaking of their heinous war crimes, 171 cases of sexual violence by the Russian occupiers were recorded in Ukraine. And proceed at your own risk, but here is a video of Olena Zelenska, our First Lady, talking about it.
На Херсонщині під загрозою застосування зброї військовий Російської Федерації неодноразово гвалтував 62-річну жінку. На Київщині зґвалтовано маму і дівчинку. Батька били і змушували спостерігати. Ще одна родина на Київщині – мама, донька і онука. Їх гвалтували 2 тижні.
That is a horrifying revelation, and I and all of us Ukrainians never wish that upon anyone. You know, I often get asked if I were in a room with Russian soldiers and I had a gun and they were unarmed, and I knew for sure that they committed the crimes in Bucha, what would I do? I would not use that gun in a way in which I think a lot of people would. I would put it to their head and walk them straight to a tribunal, straight to the Security Bureau of Ukraine, so justice can be served for them. But, you know, unlike them, I don't choose whose life gets taken away and whose stays. And that's how we're different from Russians. And speaking of which, meanwhile in Russia. Starting off strong with positive news, Russia's losses amount to 200,000 personnel, 1,800 of which are commanders. They also lost over 2,000 main battle tanks, and according to Christopher Cavolli, a NATO commander in Europe, after Russia attacked Ukraine, NATO must accept the new reality. And that, I presume, is the reality in which Russia is the main threat to world security. And to emphasize just how much of a threat, not just Russian officials, but Russian people are, you know, those same Russian people that are innocent and didn't want the war and are suffering, here is a video for you to watch of exactly what Russian people think should happen to Ukrainians.
Это Молдова, и румыны, а причем и Польша, но Польша тоже говно. Мой папа еще говорил о ней во время войны, он прошел всю войну, он говорил, что хохлы, полицаи, Западная Украина вся буквально, ну и поляки, националисты, вот и все.
Ну, то есть нацистов там много все-таки.
Да.
Ну, поэтому, наверное, надо проводить там тоже, да?
Там надо их всех хохлов до последнего и детей. Это гниль, ее надо
Все население?
все население.
А Польша куда, присоединить к России?
А ее тоже А украинцев всех, вплоть до младенцев, всех уничтожить. Это гниль, она распространилась, она уже... Теперь нас не любят они. Они не любят. Никакие нам ни братья, ни сестры. Они...
Пока мы их всех не добьем, заканчивать нельзя, пока мы не покончим со всеми нацистами.
А как считаете, вот на данный момент в Польше много нацистов?
Думаю, что да.
Ну,
Получается, Украина – враги, Польша – враги, Прибалты – враги. Это самые наипервейшие наши враги.
ну вот, как считаете, нужно прям военную кампанию какую-то туда проводить или все-таки дипломатическими методами?
Но если можно будет с дипломатическим, что я очень сомневаюсь, они слишком против нас настроены. Переговоры с ними никакие не получаются.
А вот как считаете, как так получилось, что вот там так много нацистов, вот в Прибалтике, в Польше?
А я думаю, что вот это вот после, получается, что мы их упустили после Отечественной, прошло уже 2 поколения, они уже воспитаны совершенно по-другому, у них была другая идеология, другие цели, другие задачи. Я была на Украине, наверное, где-то в 90-х годах, уже тогда они практически все были в сектах, то есть уже православие уже припиралось. Они больше предпочитали секты. Это уже в те года. Вот дальше назревало, дальше и больше. Вот к чему мы и пришли.
Enlightening, isn't it? After videos like these, I don't ever want to hear the rhetoric that Russian people are innocent and they're just brainwashed and they're suffering too. They want it. Russian people support it. And you can get all the proof that you need of that by watching interviews of random Russians on the streets and by checking out Russian mill bloggers' Telegram comment sections. You'll see just how much they don't support the war, huh? And while ordinary Russians are fantasizing about what heinous things to do to Ukrainians, Russian military actually does them. And a 10-month investigation by the Human Rights Watch led to conclusions about how and from where Russia launched that attack onto a Kramatorsk train station last year. You remember that one? Where lots of people were waiting for a train to get evacuated from Kramatorsk, and a missile hit straight into the train station building? 1. Russian troops indeed carried out the attack. 2. During the attack from Tochka U, the Russians used a ballistic missile with a cluster warhead. 3. The Ukrainian military was not based at the railway station and was not present during the shelling. The Russians knew that the hundreds of civilians were at the station waiting for evacuation. Therefore, the strike was a war crime and a disproportionate, indiscriminate attack on the civilian population. There are 2 versions of where the attack came from the territory of the Donetsk region, occupied since 2014, or from the territory of the Kharkiv region, temporarily under control of the Russian Federation, a village near Izum. Experts favor the second version and found evidence that at the time of the attack, the station was in the direct zone of damage from the enemy's missile complex in the village. Yeah, and after things like that, Russians always say that it's Ukrainians doing these false flag operations on our own civilians that our military serves to protect in order to blame the poor, innocent Russian military. Yeah, that same poor, innocent Russian military that indiscriminately shells Ukrainian cities multiple times a week, every week. But there is some potentially positive news. According to Kirill Budanov, Russia will run out of the tools for war by the end of spring. Russia has spent a lot of resources, weapons, and materials. Its economy and production are unable to cover the losses. It has changed its military chain of command. And if the Russian military does not achieve its goal this spring, they will run out of all the tools necessary to continue warfare. Let's hope that this prediction, just like many more of his predictions before, comes true. And to end the Russia section on a positive note, here is a video of the audience bursting out in laughter after Lavrov, the lovely foreign minister of Russia, delivered a speech in India in which he stated that Russia does not want war. In fact, it wants to end it. And that it didn't start the war. Anyways, take a look, it's funny.
You know, the war which we are trying to stop and which was launched against us using Ukrainian people Of course, it influenced the policy of Russia, including energy policy.
And with that, some more positive news are coming out in the international sphere. The Rheinmetall concern is negotiating the construction of a plant that will be producing Panther tanks in Ukraine. A decision is expected to be made within the next 2 months. The project assumes that the plant will be able to produce about 400 main battle tanks a year. Those are based on the Leopard 2 and were presented to the general public this past summer of 2022. And that's impressive that they will be able to produce that many of them. And if they're going to be produced in Ukraine, then we're going to be easily able to produce them for ourselves and not wait for deliveries and delivery hiccups. Which, speaking of, remember how I was talking in the previous brief, link it here, about overpromised and under-delivered amount of Leopard 2s to Ukraine? Well, right after the news about that, the UK decided to double the amount of Challengers they will be sending to Ukraine. Why would they do that? Might that be because Europe is actually lacking the tanks that it promised? Probably. In other also very positive news, negotiations on Ukraine's accession to the EU can begin this year, and the creation of the special tribunal for Putin is only a matter of time, according to Roberta Metsola. And here is a very interesting piece of news. A bit of a cheeky European scandal, might I say, or a bit of a cheeky German scandal. The head of the Defense Committee of the Bundestag accused Angela Merkel in what? In being responsible for the war in Ukraine due to her blocking of its accession to NATO in 2008. By the way, for all those people who say that NATO provoked Russia because Ukraine was gonna become a member of the alliance, Germany and France blocked Ukraine's thought of application in 2008. Because of Russia's position, and the main person behind that decision was none else but Angela Merkel. You know, that same woman who was buddy-buddy with Putin. In other news, a Russian container ship with military cargo from Syria has entered the Bosphorus Strait, and that ship is sanctioned by the US. Some mass media wrote that the ship was loaded in Syria and was accompanied by Russian military ships. It passed through the Bosphorus in the dark and will possibly be unloaded in Novorossiysk. Kudos to all of the countries that help Russia successfully bypass the sanctions. And an interesting bit of unrelated information came out of the New York Times this week. South Korea has significantly increased its arms exports to different countries around the world amid their support for Ukraine. Due to the large number of weapons the Western partners provide to Kyiv, their own stockpiles are depleting, and Korea is filling the gap by selling its weapons, which are actually considered incredibly good. In 2022, arms exports from South Korea increased by 140% and reached a record of $17.3 billion. At the same time, Seoul, as before, refuses to provide military aid to Ukraine. And they carefully monitor that their weapons do not reach the front lines through third countries. Interesting policy. Because, you know, those weapons could really help deter Russia and stop its invasion of Ukraine, save many lives, you know, but no big deal. And speaking of weapons supplies, one of the hottest topics this past 2 weeks has been whether China is supplying weapons to Russia. The answer is they are not, but the discussion is ongoing. China did not withdraw the issue from the discussion, but it did nothing. Therefore, I do not want to think about the possible consequences, said John Kirby. Kirby noted that the countries, being China and Russia, maintain relations, even though the US has warned that a toxic partner like Moscow is not in Beijing's interest. And by warned, I mean they're probably having a word with China, saying that the closer they get to Russia, the closer they get to being sanctioned and to their relationship with the US deteriorating. Which a lot of people think that Chinese relationships with the US are really bad, but Chinese economy largely depends on export to the US, and they really don't want to lose it. In my humble opinion, they're unlikely to actually make that deal a reality. But we shall see. Let me know what you think. And with that, that's all I have for you for today. Thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed the video and found it informative. And if you did, don't forget to give it a like, leave a comment, and I will hang out and talk to you in the comment section. Subscribe to my channel and turn on all of your notifications so you don't miss when the next one comes out. And as always, Check your sources and don't fall for propaganda. And I will see you next time.